The phone was already in my hand when he rolled his eyes at me. That's the image I keep coming back to. Me standing in our kitchen in the middle of a brutal July heatwave, 7 months pregnant, sweat on the back of my neck, a spatula in one hand and my cell phone in the other, while my husband Derek looked at me like I was being completely unreasonable. Like I was the problem. Like I hadn't just spent 3 hours cooking lunch for his mother, his sister Tammy, and Tammy's 2 kids, using money from my own savings account that I'd been building since before Derek and I ever said I do. 19 years. That's how long I had been married to this man. 19 years, and somehow I had ended up here, barefoot on a sticky linoleum floor in an old row house in a city that smelled like hot asphalt and rust, feeding people who had never once said thank you, while my own career was sitting on hold and my savings were draining week by week. And there was something else, something I didn't fully understand yet, something that had started as a small, itchy feeling in the back of my mind about 3 weeks earlier. Something about a signature on a document that I was almost certain I had never signed. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the context. And the context is the kind of thing that takes 19 years to build. My name is Renee Calloway. I'm 41 years old, and for most of my adult life I've been a construction cost estimator, or just estimator if you're in the industry. I work in the field that most people have never heard of until they're renovating a kitchen or building a commercial property, and suddenly someone hands them a bid sheet the size of a novel. I price out labor, materials, overhead, contingencies. I look at a set of blueprints and I tell you exactly what it's going to cost to turn those lines on paper into an actual building. I'm good at my job. More than good. I've spent 20 years getting precise, and precision is not something that comes easily in a city like Harwick, Pennsylvania, where the construction market has been limping along since the steel mills started closing in the 90s. Harwick is the kind of place that used to mean something. Drive through downtown and you can still see the bones of it. Wide commercial streets, old brick warehouses with faded painted signs, a train depot that hasn't seen a passenger train in 30 years. The kind of place where your grandparents bought their first house for $11,000 and your parents watched the factories close one by one. Derek grew up here. So did I. We met when we were both 22, got married the following year, and for a long time that felt like exactly the right thing to do. Derek worked in commercial real estate development. Not a developer himself, more of a project coordinator, someone who helped move deals along, kept contractors on schedule, handled the unglamorous middle part of the process. He was good at networking. He knew everyone in Harwick worth knowing, and he had this easy, confident way of talking that made people trust him immediately. It was one of the first things I loved about him. It would also, eventually, become one of the things I had to be most careful about. For most of our marriage, things were genuinely fine. Not perfect. Nobody's marriage is perfect after 19 years, but solid. We bought our row house on Clement Street 14 years ago, paid it down steadily, put money aside. I made decent money as an estimator. Derek's income was more variable, the way real estate always is. But there were good years. We had our routines. We had our 2 cats, a pair of grey tabbies named Wren and Clover, who had been with us for 9 years, and who ruled the house with the calm authority of animals who know their beloved. We had Sunday mornings with good coffee, and the kind of quiet that only comes from having lived somewhere long enough that the silence feels familiar. We didn't have children. That had been a choice, or rather, a series of choices and conversations over the years that eventually became a settled fact of our life. So when I found out I was pregnant at 40, it was not a small thing. It was enormous and terrifying and, once the shock wore off, something I found myself wanting fiercely and completely. Derek's reaction was harder to read. He was happy, I believed that, but he also immediately shifted into a mode I hadn't seen before, a kind of organisational energy that was less about the baby and more about the household. Within 2 weeks of the positive test, he was talking about me leaving work early, taking my maternity leave before the baby was even born, getting the nest ready, as he kept putting it. His mother, Loretta, was apparently very much in favour of this plan. Loretta had opinions about most things, delivered with the gentle persistence of someone who has never once considered that she might be wrong. "You should be resting," Derek said one evening in late May, about 2 months before everything started unraveling. We were sitting on the back porch after dinner, and Wren was asleep on the railing like a small grey loaf of bread. "You've been on your feet all day. You don't need to be driving out to job sites in this heat." "I'm pregnant, not injured," I said. "My doctor hasn't told me to slow down." "Your doctor isn't watching you come home exhausted every night." I looked at him. "Derek, I'm fine. And honestly, stepping back from work right now isn't a great idea. Donovan and I have 3 bids due in the next 6 weeks. Donovan Marsh was my business partner. We'd been running our estimating firm together for 8 years, Callaway and Marsh Cost Consulting, LLC, registered in Pennsylvania, modest but profitable. Donovan handled the client relationships and the software side. I handled the actual estimating work, the deep dive analysis, the number crunching that took real expertise. We complemented each other well, or so I had believed. "Donovan can handle the bids," Derek said. "That's literally what a business partner is for." "Donovan handles the front end. The actual estimate work is mine." "Then train him, or hire someone temporarily. Renee, you're going to be 32 weeks pregnant in August. You need to start thinking about transitioning." I didn't argue further that night. I was tired, and the humidity coming off the old mill district behind our house was suffocating, and I thought we had time to figure it out. I was wrong about that last part in ways I couldn't have anticipated. The thing I need you to understand about Donovan Marsh is that I trusted him completely. He was 53 years old, divorced, lived in a tidy condo on the east side of Harwick, came to the office every morning with gas station coffee and a rolled-up copy of whatever industry newsletter he was currently reading. He was methodical, careful, a little boring in the best possible way. We had never had a significant disagreement in 8 years. I had given him co-signature authority on our business accounts 2 years earlier when I had a minor surgery and needed someone to keep the bills paid while I recovered. I had never taken that authority back because I had never needed to. That was a decision I would spend a long time thinking about. In the second week of June, Derek sat me down and made what he called a real case for me taking early leave. He had a whole presentation, practically. Loretta was going to be around more to help. Tammy was going through a rough patch with her ex and needed family close by. And wouldn't it be wonderful if I could be home, be present, really focus on preparing for the baby? He said it with such genuine warmth that I almost didn't notice the architecture of it. I almost didn't notice that he was describing a situation where I would be home, available, and functionally responsible for managing an expanded household, not just our household, but his family's comfort and needs as well. I agreed to a modified schedule. I would finish out the 3 major bids with Donovan, hand off my active projects in an organized way, and start leave in early July, about 8 weeks before my due date. My OB said it was fine. Donovan said he could manage. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd stay involved remotely, that nothing would fall apart in a few months. I started leave on July 7th. By July 9th, Loretta was at our house for lunch. By July 12th, Tammy and her kids, 7-year-old Mason and 4-year-old Briella, had joined the lunch rotation. By the 3rd week of July, I was cooking 5 days a week for a table of 5. Managing the grocery budget out of my personal savings because Derek was in between commission payments, and Tammy needed help with the kids while she dealt with her custody situation. I want to be honest about something. I didn't explode immediately. I'm not a person who explodes. I'm a person who calculates. I sat with the discomfort for a while, told myself it was temporary, told myself family helps family. But the itchy feeling I mentioned, the one about the signature, that had started on July 19th, when I logged into our business bank account to check on a pending invoice, and saw a transfer I didn't recognize. $22,000 moved to an account I didn't have on record. I had told myself it was probably a vendor payment I'd forgotten about. I had told myself Donovan would have a perfectly good explanation. I had been telling myself a lot of things, but standing in that kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon, 7 months pregnant, watching Derek roll his eyes as I reached for my phone, I finally stopped telling myself comfortable stories. Because I had just gotten off a call with our accountant, Pam, who handled both my personal finances and the business books. And Pam had said, very carefully, in the measured tone she uses when she's delivering news she doesn't want to deliver. "Renee, I need you to look at something. There are 3 documents filed with the state in the last 60 days that have your signature on them. And I don't think you signed them." The spatula was still in my left hand. The phone was in my right. Derek was looking at me like I was overreacting, like I was hormonal and tired and making something out of nothing. And somewhere across Harwick, Donovan Marsh was sitting in our office, the office I had built, with my expertise, my reputation, my 20 years of precision, and I had absolutely no idea yet how deep the hole went. But I was about to find out. Pam Quote's voice was still in my ear, even after I'd set the phone down on the counter. 3 documents, my signature, 60 days. I stood there with the spatula dripping pasta sauce onto the linoleum, and I did the math in my head the way I always do, methodically, working backward from what I knew to what I didn't. 60 days ago was late May, right around the time Derek started making his case for me leaving work early, right around the time everything started shifting. Derek was still watching me from the doorway, arms crossed, weight on one hip. That eye roll had not fully left his face. It had settled into something more like impatient concern, the expression of a man who has decided in advance that whatever you're upset about is not worth the disruption to his afternoon. "What is it?" he said. "I need to call Pam back," I said, "and I need you to not be in this kitchen while I do." Something moved across his face. Not guilt, I want to be careful about what I say I saw, because I was upset and pregnant and running on 3 hours of bad sleep. But it was something. A flicker of recalibration, like he was deciding how to respond rather than just responding. "Renee," he said, "whatever Pam told you." "Derek." I set the spatula down on the counter, very carefully, because I was trying extremely hard not to throw it. "Please go sit somewhere else." He went. I called Pam back and stood at the kitchen window while she walked me through it. The documents were filed with the Pennsylvania Department of State, amendments to our LLC's operating agreement. 2 of them altered the ownership split between Donovan and me. The 3rd removed a clause that had given me exclusive authority over any sale, merger, or dissolution of the business. All 3 bore my signature, or something that looked, at a quick glance, exactly like it. "Pam," I said, "what does this actually mean, in plain terms?" "In plain terms," she said, and I could hear her choosing her words carefully, "if these amendments are valid, Donovan now holds 51% of Callaway and Marsh, you hold 49%, and he has the legal authority to make major business decisions without your approval, including selling the business." I was quiet for a moment. Outside the kitchen window, a neighbour's kid was riding a bike in slow circles on the sidewalk. The July heat made the air above the asphalt shimmer. "And if the signatures are forged?" I asked. "Then you have a fraud case. But Renee, you need an attorney before you do anything else. Don't call Donovan. Don't confront Derek. Don't touch the business accounts. Get an attorney first, today if you can." I thanked her. I hung up. I stood at that window for another full minute, and I thought about the $22,000 I had seen transferred out of the business account. I thought about how Donovan had co-signature authority. I thought about how Derek had spent 2 weeks convincing me to step away from the office, away from the day-to-day, away from the accounts, away from the paper trail. And I thought about how perfectly, how conveniently, those 2 things lined up. Then I went to the bathroom, locked the door, sat on the edge of the tub and cried for about 4 minutes. Not out of helplessness, I want to make that clear. I cried because I was 7 months pregnant and my lower back had been hurting for 3 days, and the air conditioning in our row house was barely functional, and I had just understood that the 2 men I trusted most outside of this marriage had apparently spent the last 2 months dismantling something I had built over 2 decades. And the man I trusted most inside this marriage had possibly known about it, possibly helped create the conditions for it. 4 minutes. Then I washed my face, looked at myself in the mirror above the sink, and started thinking like an estimator. An estimator doesn't panic when the numbers don't add up. An estimator figures out where the error is. You go line by line. You identify what's real and what's projected. You find the discrepancy, you trace it back to its source, and then you correct it. That's the job. That has always been the job. The next 3 days were the worst of it. Not because anything dramatic happened, it was actually the opposite. Everything was quiet. I cooked lunch. Loretta came over and sat at my kitchen table and talked about how Tammy's ex-husband was being unreasonable about the custody schedule, while I smiled and nodded and mentally catalogued every shared financial account that Derek and I had. I lay awake at night next to my husband and listened to him breathe and wondered what he knew. I couldn't ask him yet. Pam was right. I needed an attorney before I moved a single visible piece. I also had a problem I hadn't anticipated. I was exhausted in a way that went beyond tired. The pregnancy had been physically straightforward up to this point, but the stress of those 3 days did something to my body that I couldn't ignore. My feet swelled. I started getting headaches that sat behind my left eye like a slow, dull pressure. My OB had told me at my last appointment to watch my blood pressure, and I was watching it climb in real time. I could feel it, even without a cuff on my arm. I was trying to hold everything together, and my body was telling me, loudly and clearly, that it had limits. On the 4th night, I made a decision. I was not going to do this alone. The person I called was not who you'd expect. It wasn't my sister, who lives in Phoenix, and would have immediately told me to leave Derek, pack a bag, fly west. She operates in absolutes. And I needed someone who could sit with complexity. It wasn't my closest friend, Margot, who is wonderful, but who also cannot keep a secret for longer than 48 hours, and who is, unfortunately, Facebook friends with Tammy. The person I called was my Aunt Claudette. Claudette is 67 years old, retired, and spent 31 years as a paralegal for a civil litigation firm in Pittsburgh. She is the person in my family who knows exactly how much she doesn't know, and who knows exactly who to call when she doesn't know it. She is also the only person in my life who has never once told me to calm down. "Tell me everything," she said when she picked up. "Start at the beginning and don't leave anything out because you think it's not important." I told her everything. It took 45 minutes, standing in our backyard after Derek had gone to bed, speaking quietly into the phone while Wren wound around my ankles in the dark. When I finished, Claudette was silent for a moment. "Okay," she said. "First thing tomorrow morning, you're going to call a business litigation attorney, not a general practice firm, someone who specifically handles LLC disputes and business fraud. I'm going to text you 2 names tonight. Both are in Pittsburgh, both are excellent, and both have handled cases involving forged business documents before." "Claudette, Pittsburgh is an hour and a half away, I know. Drive the hour and a half, Renee. You do not want a Harwick attorney for this. Harwick is too small. Derek knows too many people." She was right. I knew she was right the moment she said it. "Second thing," she continued, "do not remove any money from any joint account with Derek. Do not move any business funds. Do not send any emails to Donovan. Everything you do from this moment forward creates a record, and right now the record needs to look like you had no idea anything was wrong. Because legally, the less you've disturbed, the cleaner your case is." "What about the 22,000? I asked. "The transfer out of the business account." "Screenshot it. Screenshot everything. But don't touch the money. Your attorney will advise you on whether to freeze the accounts and when." "And Derek?" I asked. The word felt strange in my mouth, heavy in a way it hadn't been before. Claudette was quiet for a beat. "What do you actually know about Derek's involvement?" "Nothing concrete," I said, "but the timing. The timing is suspicious. Suspicious isn't evidence. Get your attorney first. Then we figure out what Derek knew." I went back inside and stood in the hallway outside our bedroom for a moment. I could hear Derek's breathing through the door, slow, even, the breathing of a man sleeping without apparent difficulty. I thought about 19 years. I thought about Sunday mornings and good coffee and the quiet that comes from long familiarity. I thought about the baby moving inside me, a slow roll under my ribs that she had started doing in the evenings, reliable as a clock. I went to the guest room. I told myself it was because of the heat, because the window unit in there was better. Maybe that was even partially true. The next morning, I called the first name on Claudette's list. Her name was Vera Stanton, and she had a 30-minute slot available at 2 o'clock that afternoon because of a cancellation. I told Derek I had a prenatal appointment, which was not entirely a lie, because I had called my OB's office first and scheduled a blood pressure check for 11, and the numbers had been high enough that my OB told me firmly to reduce my stress load. I didn't tell her what was causing the stress. I just said I understood. I drove to Pittsburgh with my laptop, a folder containing every business document I had kept copies of at home, and a travel mug of decaf that I didn't actually drink because my stomach was in knots the entire hour and a half. I parked in a garage downtown, found the building, rode the elevator to the 14th floor, and sat in a waiting room that smelled like recycled air and expensive carpet, while I watched the second hand on a clock move around its face 12 times. Vera Stanton was in her mid-50s, compact, with short silver hair and reading glasses on a beaded chain. She shook my hand with a firm, dry grip and looked at the folder under my arm with the focused attention of someone who has spent decades looking at folders and knowing immediately which ones matter. "Tell me what you have," she said. I told her. She took notes. She did not interrupt, did not make sympathetic noises, did not tell me it would be okay. She just listened and wrote, occasionally asking a precise, specific question. "When exactly did you grant him co-signature authority? Did you receive any notice of these filings from the state? Has the business received any offers or inquiries regarding sale in the last 6 months?" That last question stopped me. "Not that I know of," I said. "Not that you know of," she repeated, and wrote something down. At the end of the 30 minutes, she set her pen down and looked at me directly. "Miss Calloway, based on what you've described, you have grounds to challenge all 3 amendments on the basis of fraudulent execution. If the signatures are forged, and we'll need a forensic document examiner to confirm that, you're looking at potential criminal exposure for whoever forged them. You also have grounds to seek a preliminary injunction to freeze any major business decisions while the dispute is litigated." "How long does that take?" I asked. "The injunction, if we move quickly, could be in front of a judge within 2 to 3 weeks. The underlying litigation will take longer, months potentially, but we can protect the business from being sold or dissolved in the short term." "And the $22,000? "We'll subpoena the account records. We'll find out exactly where that money went. That's step 2. She paused. "Ms. Calloway, I also want to gently suggest that if there's any possibility your husband was involved in facilitating this, in creating the conditions for these filings, you should speak with a family law attorney as well. Those 2 things can run on parallel tracks." I looked at my hands in my lap. They were steady. I was a little surprised by that. "One thing at a time," I said. "One thing at a time," she agreed. "But don't wait too long on the second thing." I drove home in the late afternoon, the sun dropping behind the hills west of the highway, the city of Harwick appearing ahead of me like a collection of old promises. I had a folder of documents, a retained attorney, and a plan that was still rough around the edges but was, for the first time in weeks, actually a plan. I also had something else, something I hadn't felt since the morning Pam called. A specific, focused kind of anger. Not hot and scattered, but cold and precise. The kind I recognize, the kind I use at work when I find an error buried deep in a bid, when I trace it back to its source, when I understand exactly what went wrong and exactly how to correct it. I pulled onto Clement Street and saw Tammy's car still in front of our house. Through the front window, I could see the blue flicker of the television. I sat in my car for a moment with the engine running. Donovan had sent me a text that afternoon, while I was in Pittsburgh. Bree Donovan had sent me a text that afternoon while I was in Pittsburgh. It said, "Hey, haven't heard from you in a bit. Hope you're feeling okay. Let me know if you need anything from the office." Friendly, casual. The text of a man who either had no idea I'd been to see an attorney, or the text of a man who was very good at pretending. I didn't respond. I sat in my car on Clement Street for another 2 minutes, watching the blue flicker in the window, and then I went inside. The weeks that followed were the quietest war I have ever fought. Vera moved fast. Her forensic document examiner, a woman named Dr. Patricia Holt, based in Philadelphia, with 30 years of experience in questioned document examination, confirmed within 10 days what Pam and I had already suspected. The signatures on all 3 LLC amendments were not mine. The pen pressure was wrong. The letter formation in my last name was wrong. Someone had practiced the signature, gotten close, but not close enough to fool an expert who knew exactly what to look for. Dr. Holt put it in a written report that was 14 pages long and left no room for alternative interpretation. Vera filed for the preliminary injunction on a Thursday morning. The judge granted it by Friday afternoon. Donovan Marsh received the notice that same day, and I know exactly how he reacted because his assistant, a young woman named Carly who had worked for us for 2 years and who was, it turned out, furious on my behalf, called me that evening to tell me he had gone very pale and very quiet and had spent the next hour making phone calls behind a closed door. I also know, because Vera's subpoena of the business account records eventually revealed it, where the $22,000 had gone. It had gone to a holding company registered in Delaware, which existed solely as a pass-through to a personal account that belonged to Donovan. It was, Vera told me, not subtle. It was the kind of fraud that works when nobody is watching, when the person who should be watching has been carefully maneuvered away from the desk. It works until someone starts watching again. What Vera also found, buried in 3 months of email correspondence that Carly had quietly forwarded to a personal account as her own form of insurance, was a thread between Donovan and a commercial real estate broker in Pittsburgh. They had been in preliminary discussions about selling Callaway and Marsh to a regional estimating firm that was consolidating smaller practices across western Pennsylvania. The proposed sale price was $410,000. Under the fraudulent amendments, Donovan would have received 51% of that. Under the original operating agreement, the real one, with my real signature, he would have received 30%. The difference was $88,000. That was the number that made my hands go cold when Vera read it to me over the phone. Not the fraud itself, not even the forged signatures, it was the calculation behind it. The careful, premeditated arithmetic of a man I had trusted for 8 years, who had looked at our shared work and decided his share wasn't enough, and had planned to fix that while I was pregnant and distracted and busy cooking lunch for people who weren't even grateful for the meal. Now, Derek. I had been waiting. Not passively, I want to be clear about that. I had been gathering. Every night after Derek fell asleep, I sat in the guest room with my laptop and went through every joint account, every shared document, every email I could access. I was looking for the thing that would tell me definitively what he knew and when he knew it. And I found it, 10 days before I confronted him. A text thread on his phone that I saw by accident. Genuinely by accident. His phone was on the kitchen counter, and a notification lit up the screen while I was standing right next to it. The preview showed 4 words from Donovan's name. She still doesn't know. I didn't touch the phone. I walked out of the kitchen, went upstairs, sat on the edge of the bed, and breathed through my nose for approximately 60 seconds. Then I called Claudette. "He knew," I said when she picked up. She was quiet for a moment. "How much?" "I don't know yet, but he knew something." "Okay," she said. "Call your family law attorney tomorrow." I had already retained one, a woman named Gail Fredericks, who had an office in Harwick and who had been recommended to me by Vera. I had retained her 2 weeks earlier, quietly, paying the retainer out of my personal savings account, the same savings account that had been feeding Derek's mother and sister for the past month and a half. Gail was calm, methodical, and had a way of laying out options that made even the worst ones feel survivable. The confrontation happened on a Wednesday evening in the 2nd week of August. I had chosen the timing carefully. Loretta and Tammy were not at the house. I had subtly discouraged the lunch gathering that day by telling Derek the night before that I wasn't feeling well and needed rest, which was true enough. I was 30 weeks pregnant and exhausted down to my bones. But I was not too exhausted for this. I waited until after dinner. Derek was in the living room, half watching something on television, Ren stretched across the back of the couch behind him. I came in and sat down in the armchair across from him, and I had my phone in my hand. "I need to talk to you about Donovan," I said. Derek muted the television. He looked at me with that same expression I had catalogued weeks ago, the one that was deciding how to respond, rather than just responding. "What about him?" I know about the amendments, I said. I know about the forged signatures. I know about the sale discussions with the broker in Pittsburgh. And I know about the text he sent you asking whether I still didn't know. The colour in Derek's face did something interesting. It didn't drain, it shifted, like a tide going out slowly. He was quiet for a long moment. "Renee," he started. "I am not asking you to explain," I said. "I'm telling you what I know. I want to give you the opportunity to tell me what I don't know yet. That's the only reason we're having this conversation tonight, instead of you being served papers tomorrow morning." He looked at the phone in my hand. He looked at me. And I watched him calculate, the same way I calculate actually, working backward from what I knew to what was still in play. Only his arithmetic had always been about a different kind of bottom line. "I didn't know about the forgery," he said finally. "I want you to know that. I didn't know he forged anything." "But you knew he was planning to restructure the business." A pause. "He told me he was going to talk to you about buying out a larger share, that he had an investor interested. I thought—" He stopped. "You thought it was a business conversation that didn't involve you?" I said. "Or you thought it was a business conversation that very conveniently benefited you, because if Donovan sold the firm, I'd have a lump sum and no reason to go back to work after the baby, and you'd have exactly the domestic arrangement you'd been pushing for since May." He didn't deny it. That was the moment. Not the forgery, not the $22,000, not even the $400,000 sale. That was the moment I understood the full shape of what had happened to me. Derek hadn't forged anything. He hadn't stolen anything. What he had done was quieter and in some ways worse. He had seen an opportunity being created around me and had simply decided not to warn me about it. He had let it happen because the outcome suited him. "You begged me to take my maternity leave early so I could make a home," I said. My voice was steady. I had been saying this sentence in my head for 3 weeks. "But since when does making a home mean cooking lunch for your mother, your sister, and her 2 kids, while you burn through my savings?" He rolled his eyes. I already had the phone in my hand. I called Gail. Donovan Marsh was charged with forgery, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. He did not go to trial. His attorney negotiated a settlement 12 weeks later. He surrendered his stake in Callaway and Marsh back to me in full, repaid the $22,000 with interest, and paid an additional $61,000 in damages and legal fees, the figure Vera arrived at after a careful accounting of lost business opportunities during the months the injunction had been in play. The sale discussions with the Pittsburgh firm were dead before the ink was dry on the injunction. Carly, who had saved those emails, was offered a full-time position with the firm the following spring. She accepted. Derek and I separated in September. I stayed in the house on Clement Street. Gail made sure of that, pointing out that I had contributed more to the mortgage over the course of the marriage, and that my due date was 6 weeks out, and no judge was going to require a woman in her 3rd trimester to relocate. Derek moved into a rental 2 miles away. Loretta was not pleased. Tammy expressed her opinion on social media in ways I chose not to read. I found this easier than expected. My daughter was born on a Saturday in early October, 7 pounds and 4 ounces, with her father's nose and what I am choosing to believe is my stubbornness. I named her Iris. She came home to a house that was quiet in a way that felt, for the first time in months, like the right kind of quiet. Not the quiet of held breath, but the quiet of space that belongs to you. Claudette drove in from Pittsburgh the week after and stayed for 10 days. She slept in the guest room and made coffee at 6 in the morning and held Iris while I showered and told me repeatedly that I had handled everything correctly. I told her I'd handled it scared and exhausted and probably made 20 mistakes I couldn't even see yet. She said that was the same thing. Donovan's last check cleared in January. I sat at the kitchen table with Pam on a video call, and we went through the numbers together. The real ones. The ones that showed what the business was actually worth now that it was unencumbered and fully mine. It was more than I had calculated, even in my best-case scenarios. The firm had a reputation that had survived the disruption. Clients had stayed. New ones had come, partly because the story had gotten out in the local industry in the way these things do, and there is apparently a market for an estimator who will fight for what she built. The divorce was finalised in March. Derek got half the equity in the house, which he was legally entitled to, and I refinanced to pay him out. It was expensive. It was worth it. I still live on Clement Street. Iris is in the living room right now, 9 months old, doing her level best to pull herself upright on the coffee table. Wren is watching her from the couch, with the calm, philosophical expression of a cat who has seen stranger things and is not concerned. Clover is asleep in a patch of afternoon sun by the back door. I went back to work part-time in February and full-time in April, with a nanny 4 days a week and Claudette on speed dial for emergencies. I have 3 major bids due next month. I am, for the first time in a long time, the only person in the room when I make a decision about my own company. Someone asked me recently what I would have done differently. I thought about it for a long time before I answered. I would have taken that co-signature authority back from Donovan when the surgery was over. I would have noticed sooner that Derek's warmth had an agenda underneath it. I would have trusted the itchy feeling earlier, the one that started 3 weeks before everything broke open, the small, specific discomfort of something that didn't add up. But here is what I have learned, after 20 years of looking at numbers for a living. The error is always there before you find it. The discrepancy exists the moment someone makes the wrong entry, not the moment you catch it. What matters is not how fast you find it. What matters is that you don't stop looking until you do. I found it. That's enough.